Recorded. Right, let's get this thing started. Happy Friday, welcome to another session. Today we're going to be talking about Revit view management. So one of the biggest challenges in any Revit view is that it's very easy to create views, but it's very difficult to kind of manage the views. So today what we're going to do is have a couple things that I'm going to go through. Let's see, next slide. Come on. Okay, so today we're just going to go over like views, different types of views you can create and how you can apply view templates on it as well if you want to start it. Next thing I'm going to talk about is floor plan versus area plan, how you can use it in certain scenarios. Callout or callout reference. One of the biggest challenge with the callouts is that everybody likes to use it, but nobody knows the secret behind. There is some cautionary tale, I would say. And finally, we just got to talk about view reference. The view reference, I love it because it's like a view of all views. You can do it anything. You can just put in. You probably used it as well. Like probably you experienced some of it. Yeah. So let's get to it. Now, when it comes to views in Revit browsers, you got two types that you will see inside an office. One of them is that you can sort it by view type, right? But my preferred method would be to sort it by parameters. So you just give it a parameters and say, okay, this view I want it to be, sheet views, or if you want to working views, versus if you have this sort of a mechanism where you say view type. You notice that the list gets super long. Okay, it can get super crazy. I know some of the views you will encounter this type. Okay, but I would just say if you were doing a large projects, I would recommend always do it by parameters, so that you understand the organization of the view. You know that this belongs in a sheet, and sometimes what happens is that you have different types of submission, right? And what happened with this view type is that it doesn't tell you what view those things are in. Like it doesn't know if it's going to be like the design development, the working drawings, and multiple different variations of it. So this is why I like the parameter type, because it allows you to control it and say, okay, this view belongs into this view, so you have like a sequential thing. Because Revit projects, what tends to happen is that you always want to do, like, it's like a process where you go start from the beginning till the end, and you always want to organize it in this kind of a manner. But some office still likes using this view type. I don't blame them. But always, when you click on the view type, you always make sure that you put in sort by view and then followed by families and type. So that way you're going to get like elevation, storefront, elevation, site elevation, and et cetera, et cetera. If you don't do that, what happens is that all your elevations just organize it as one elevations, and there's no way you can actually tell what elevation they're in. Okay? Source view. Okay, whenever you start Revit templates, they always have this floor plan call. I always call it the source view. So every time you create a new floor plan, whenever you create a new floor plan, whenever you override it, let's say for example you want to change the level 1 to ground level, what happens is that when you start doing that, it will automatically link in. Now there's chances are people will make this mistake, right? If you do not have like a source view, what happens is that sometimes people can accidentally rename a view to another view. For instance, I have one view in this particular plan where level 1 M&N coordination, okay, that's accidental, right? Because what happens is that if you're renaming a source view, it will automatically rename other views as well. Ceiling, structural plans, and sometimes on the elevation you will see, the name got changed. So just be aware of it. So what I typically do in this kind of a case is that whenever I create a view, I would keep the source views as is so that you do not touch it, and basically just duplicate a view from it. That's how I do it. I'll probably demonstrate what I mean by later on, like, because this is confusing for a lot of people. Yeah, and then what happened, I always tell people, is like, I always like to do source view. Source view is just basically any view, when you rename it, it's always going to rename your elevation And the problem is that people don't check and they say yes, and then what happens is that you end up with a view that's accidentally renamed to something else. View template. I love using view template when it comes to like basically turning off views in an instance. So this is how I would set it up, is that when you do a view template, you always create like a view for each type. If you have stairs, you have walls, if you have working, if you have SKs, and what you do is that section, and then family and type equals this particular type. And what happens is that when you add it to the view template, you could just automatically just turn it off. So for instance, if you have a floor plan, you don't really need stairs or wall sections. So what you do is that you just say, okay, for all the wall section, just turn it off. So it's easily manipulated. So you don't have a lot of sections on your floor plan, and then you have to manually turn off every single one. So rather than doing that, use the view template. It actually helps you save time. Okay. Now, sometimes people always ask, like, okay, what if you want to create a new view, but you do not want to show it constantly on the other, let's say, for example, for this view template, you do not want to constantly add views, like a different type of section. There's another way you could do it, is that if you want to do it the complete opposite, where you only want to show site section, but you do not want to see the rest of the other newer section. Typically how I do it is that family and type, you always do not equal. Okay, that's the other reversed. I always get people asking, you know, what if you do not want to create the next view, like different view types? Then I would just say do family and type does not equal site section, and then what happens is that if you check it off, which means that all the other section, regardless of what you created in the future, it will always automatically turn off. So that's how I do it for site plan, right? Site plan, you only want to show site plan section, but you do not want to see the other section. So you do it the reverse way. Callouts. Okay. I always tell people, callout, use it sparingly. Okay. You could do it for smaller projects, but once you get to the larger projects, I would not recommend using callouts, right? The problem with callouts is that when you start creating callouts, it's going to stick in that plan. And what happens is that if you put it in the wrong particular view, it's going to stuck there forever. So that's a cautionary tale I always tell user. If, let's say, for example, user create a callout views in, let's say, a working view, it's going to be there forever. So sometimes newer user, when they just create callout, I just say don't do that. What I typically tell user to do is always use the reference view. So whenever you create a callout, always check on this box. Now the next thing you could do is that you could click on this drafting view, and then there's a list of views that you could actually reference to. This is what I recommend mostly if you're doing a larger project. This will save you time because later on when you start referencing to this view, you could actually copy those information. And let's say assuming that you have your stairs, let's say for one floor plan is the same as the next floor plan, you can actually copy the same callout and place it on the upper floor, and then the reference linking will still exist, right? It will connect it. So that's the
when you're doing that, is it creating like another sheet or something to put the callout on, and just referencing?
Yeah, it's like I should say it's like an annotation.
Okay.
So it's like an annotation where it's just reference to that view, and that's pretty much it. So it's like an annotation. You could just copy it out. This works really well if you're doing a lot of details. Let's say you have a detailed key plan and you want to reference, let's say this detail is going to be used for multiple times. Then yeah, I would use this callout use reference view. Then you can actually copy those same spot, multiple location, and then you can actually copy it and then copy it up in multiple levels. Let's assume that you have level 2 is the same as level 3, 4. Then you can copy the same callout all over the place. So it makes it a little bit faster, right?
So is a callout a 2D annotation element?
It's actually, okay, callout, if you do it referencing, it's just a reference view. It's not a 2D, but when you create a callout, it's actually a plan, a snapshot of that plan.
Yes.
It creates another view called callout views, and then you can just add stuff on top of that. It's still reference to the model, but you just basically just doing it more of a detail kind of a thing.
But you were saying that that call out, if I created that call out in the working view,
Yes.
that's not going to show up on my.
No, it would not show up.
Page.
No, it would not.
It's like an annotation, like it's like a detail.
Yes.
Not an actual element, because sections and things like that will show up.
Yes, everywhere. Yeah, callout.
Callouts don't.
Yeah, callout's very view dependent, right?
Okay.
So if you put it inside a particular view, it will stay there. Okay, and once you remove it, this is why I don't like using callout, is because if someone accidentally hit delete, your view's gone. So that's something that view managing we typically tell people don't use it, because people will delete stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, accidentally. All right, some of the callout weirdness I'm noticing when I'm working with several other users. Here are some of the weird glitches you will encounter in callout. Now, for one of the major one is the stairs. Okay, so when you create a callout of your stairs, what tends to happen is that your stair reads like a 3D cut rather than a proper floor plan stairs. So when you look at the floor plan stairs, what you see is just like nice outline, and sometimes you can show hidden line. Whereas if you do a callout, it displays 3D, and then when it cuts, it's like some part gets obscured, and it's very weird. Even railing as well behave really, really abnormally. So this is why I say, you know what, if you have to cut out callout, don't use it, because it just makes it very difficult to display certain graphics. If you do a lot of CAD linking, let's say for example you have a site plan and you want to kind of link in certain elements, right? Sometimes what tends to happen is that your CAD link just don't get transferred over. You know, this is one of the biggest my pet peeves, is that if you really need that CAD, right, just as a linking, for some odd reason callout just doesn't want to transfer it over for some odd reason. I did that a couple of times just to testing, but I think I could be wrong in floor plan, but for detail, for section and stuff like that, it may be wrong. Okay. Now the next one would be the most interesting part is I should shut it out. Okay. The Revit link. When you use Revit link a lot for like you're displaying like a CAD stuff, what happens is that Revit link cannot reference to a proper view. So if you go using callout and then you go VV and go to Revit link, it will not display anything. It just display like elevations or something really weird. So just be aware, because we had issues where people create a callout, they want to reference a site plan that I've created from a Revit, and it just will not show up. So it's just only referencing elevation. I was like, wow, this is weird. So just be aware, callouts like that.
To do that, we should use like drafting views.
The
CAD file on it.
You could do that, or you could do a proper floor plan and just basically just duplicate it and crop the view, and then just use the reference, right? Don't use the callout, just use the proper one. Okay. Now the next one is kind of the kind of like the camel breaks the camel's back kind of a thing. Is that you can't really do a proper region, like a view region. So let's say assuming that you have a plan and you have a stepping condition where this one floor is actually higher than the other. Callout, what it does is that it do not respect that. So basically when you create a floor plan, it just doesn't work. Okay, we tried everything. We try to add in a view range just to kind of like change the height. It doesn't work. Okay, so something that you need to be aware of in callout. It's something that Autodesk don't tell you, right? So it's something, if you want to use a lot of view range, do not use callout. Okay. All right. Now I created this chart just to show like different types of view. You guys probably know, like most of the time there's like plan, section, elevation, drafting, 3D, schedule, callout, legend, and key, schedule. Anyways, okay, so this is from one of my old presentation, but it has a very, very usefulness if you are doing a lot of the views. Plans has a lot of other stuff, like you can see area plan, floor plans, ceiling, structural plan, section, again, use a lot, elevation as well. Once you get to drafting, the only thing I don't like about drafting is that if you want to crop your view, like let's say for example you want to see only this certain region, Drafting doesn't have that. So you basically display the whole thing. Let's say, for example, you have a CAD and you have a huge like CAD. You want to only crop like certain one. You can't really use drafting view. Okay, just as a precautionary. 3D schedule. Callout's a very interesting one because Callout is it's when you create it, it's just its own entity, or if you reference it, it's a annotation. Okay, key schedule, etc.
So what is the benefit of using a drafting view? Like what can you do with a drafting view rather than just
What's the benefit of it? Okay, assuming that you're doing like a typical detail for a lot of, let's say, projects, what drafting detail does is that you can actually copy from one project to another. It automatically will take all that properties that you have in Callout view and then transfer it over to the next project, and it's automatically created. So that's the benefit of a Callout view versus if you're doing it for the floor plan section, it's a bit trickier. You cannot transfer those information as much, whereas drafting view, you can basically just transfer one to another very easily just by copy and pasting. Okay, so that's what I like. Sometimes when you do typical details, typical notes, typical like stuff like that, it's better to use drafting views because those are repetitive item. Okay, legends. Sometimes people like to use legend for like keynotes and all that's like let's say key plan, for instance. Legends, they don't copy well into another project. So what I typically tell users that if you want to create an item that is a legend, first you have to copy the drafting view first, then you transfer those drafting view into the legend. Okay, it's an extra step. Okay, legend is basically a view that you can actually reference in multiple views. Like if you have like let's say a key plan is a perfect example, right? And then there's also other notes like elevation tags and stuff like that, just properly. And then yeah, that's the only thing. All right, let's go to a demo. Yeah, maybe I should. Kidoki. Not right now. Okay, so let's go into a Revit project. Do I have it open? I hope I do. If not, then yeah, sorry about it. Oh, I don't have the project open. Okay, let's open up a project. I'm just going to use my local one. I'm not going to go to the network because it's going to be too long. So let's assume that I'm going to use this as an example project. So when you first start any Revit project, you will see a lot of other people's work inside your view. Like sometimes what people do is that they add their name on it, right? So a lot of time in 3D it's okay because everybody is going to have different things. But when it comes to floor plans, most often I would just say if you see other people's name that you don't recognize or in the project team, I always tell people just delete them, right? Because they're no longer here. What's the point of keeping that view? Because every time when you add another view, it's always going to increase the file size for Revit. So that's how when you do view management, get rid of it as much as you can. Also for section as well, like if you see a lot of like section 1, section 2, section 3, which means that someone's probably using it, but just to like check an analysis. But most often you can actually delete all that stuff. It's not really very useful to keep all that section around because it just adds up to your file size. So the smaller file size, Revit typically opens very fast. This one in particular, it's about like 200 megabytes. Once you hit that limit, Revit will open a little bit slower, like 5 minutes sometimes. So it's better to try to keep it as minimum as possible. Okay, when we first started, this is how I do my view, is that you can actually do browser organization. And then for this one, you can say new. I'm just going to say you could do by view type. So how you sort this is that first you sort it by family and types, and followed by view name. And if I click on that, what it does is that it basically turns it into more like this, like floor plan, ceiling plan, building elevation, etc., etc. You can do this. I think a lot of Via people, they used to this kind of a view. I have no issue with this. The only issue I have is that once you have multiple phases of the project, let's say you're doing this project starting from the beginning from the schematic design to design development and working drawings, this is very convoluted. Okay, this process is very convoluted because you don't know what's what. Okay, because this is just a mess of whatever, everything, just combine it together. So what I typically recommend user doing is that you go to browser organization. I'll create one called the parameter type. So how parameter works is that it relies on this parameter right here, right? This one, drawing type, this one, sheet view. You basically just go in there and then you just type it in what you want this to be. Okay, there's a pull down list. Once you add it in, the next one you can just say list, give me a list. Okay, so this is how I would typically do it for a larger multiple kind of phase project, so that when I click on this and hit apply, you're always going to have sheet view. Okay, let's say for example you're doing a next view for working drawings. Then what you do here is that, let's assume that this question mark, I don't know what that is, and then I just go in here. I can say, okay, this one belongs in 1.0 BP sheet view, for instance, right? And what happens is that it's going to organize it based on that sheet view. Okay, so it's very easy organization, and then what you can do is that you can collapse it, and you know that this is a sheet view for the current process, and then the next one is going to be the working drawing process. Okay, very simple, straightforward. If you don't see this, let's say for example, I think they call it like something else, like primary or secondary. But for this one, I call it drawing type, subtype. I mean, it's a different nomenclature, but you will see that it's basically acting the same way. Okay. Now, within this view type, you have a chance to actually add a view template. So you can go in here. Let's assume that you're going to create the floor plan. You want certain view template added to it. You can go edit type, and you notice that here, view template added to the new view, set to none, right? So let's assume that I want it to be floor plan, this one. Okay. So next time when I create a new floor plan, let's say for example floor plan, do not duplicate. I'm just going to use just one of them. And you notice that the view itself, let's see, where is that view? You see that view itself already has sheet plan, partial, everything already set up. Okay, there we go. That's the view in there. There's a benefit to this, and then there is also disadvantage. Okay, the benefit of doing this is that if you are so, how should I say, you want to be very cautious from the beginning, this is a perfect way to start for just to apply the new view. What it gets really bothersome is that once you start to create new views, this thing becomes a hindrance. You have to kind of always go in there and check none, right? So that becomes a hindrance for a lot of users. So what I typically recommend users is that you could put it in if you want to, but most of the time just leave it as none. This applies to pretty much any other view. You will see people do this quite often, right? Just added view templates into views. But if you want to know how to turn it off, this is how you do it, is that you go edit type, set it to none. Every time you create a new view, it will not have that. Okay. Sometimes when you create a section, you already have the view template applied to it. So this is how you break out of that. Now there's a couple of things in here. You notice that there's a one called reference label, called sim. Okay. What this does is that every time when you create a callout view reference to another view, it will always add that sim to it. So if you want to take it off, I would recommend just say hit that and say OK. But for now, I'm just going to leave it as it is because it's by default. Any questions so far with this? Pretty simple, straightforward.
When it says sim, what is it saying?
Similar.
Okay.
Yeah.
So like if you have one detail and maybe the grid line is labeled as J, but it also occurs on H or something,
Okay.
you would just have that same detail and it would say sim. 'Cause it's
Sim.
similar.
Okay.
It's very similar, but it's not the exact one.
Similar, yeah. No, a lot of time, if you run into this problem, a lot of people they just turn that off and then just add a text to it. I mean, it's just basically the same thing. Okay, I usually just take it off because it's very annoying. Because every view you create, let's say you're referencing to another view, It's always going to say sim, 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 sim. I mean, what's the point? So I just say turn it off. Don't bother with it. Okay, let's talk about, let's see, what am I supposed to, okay, area views, okay. You notice that there is always areas and floor plan, okay. Do you guys know the differences or not really? Okay, floor plans is floor plans, okay. So when you have a floor plan, what you have in a floor plan is just a floor plan. It will display your colors for the rooms and all that stuff. The only differences between the floor plan and area plan is that the area plan will have an extra layer on top of your floor plan, which is your area boundaries. So let's say, for example, if you want to draw an area boundary, you can do it in this view. Versus if you go to a floor plan, let's say, for example, here, you notice that area boundary is check off. You can't do it. So that's the only differences between it. Now, if you are doing a lot of, let's say, commercial buildings where you want to display the area or the zoning kind of a thing, I would recommend using area plan because it will save you a lot of time rather than having two separate drawings and then you have to kind of mash them together. It becomes annoying, but it's manageable if you do it that way. But most of the time I say if you want to kill two birds with one stone, always go with area plan. Okay? Now, there's another, when do you use floor plan rather than area plan? Okay, when you're doing a lot of core plans, let's say core, you're doing, let's say this detail for this core, I would recommend using floor plan rather than area plan. You know the reason why, right? Or not really? I'll tell you the secret. Okay, the reason why you want to use a floor plan rather than area plan is because your callout cannot reference to area plan. Okay, that's the problem. Last time I tried to do it, I was like saying, "Where's my area plan?" And it doesn't show up. It only shows up all the floor plans. So this is becoming an issue. So if you are creating any, let's say, this particular core plans, always use floor plan, not use area plan. For the rest, let's say, for example, if you're doing like an overall like this, let's say an overall plan. Let's say if you're doing this for, let's say, site plan, etc. Yeah, I would recommend doing this. Okay, this is kind of like overall plan. I use area plan because I could add like this layer information. Let's say CRU on top of this information. Okay, so that's the only layer. Like if you don't have that layer, which means that you have to create another one and put it on top, which kind of wastes of time. So that's the reasoning behind that. So if you start doing a lot of unit layouts and stuff like that, always start with area plan. Now, how do you create area plan? First, how you do it is that you go into architecture. You see there's a room and area, and you click on this called the area and volume computation. And in here, you guys get this area scheme. Now, what you can do is that you can create new and say this one I'm going to call this FSR, for instance. Let's say if you're doing City Vancouver, it's going to call the floor space ratio, where they want you to do all this weird calculation. And let's assume that that's what you want and say okay. Now, how you're going to create a new area plan is you go in here, click on area plan right here. Okay, click on this, and now what you can do is that you have FSR. And now what you can do is that I'm going to go create selectively. Okay, it's going to tell you, do you want to do this? Say no, 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 no. Always say no. Okay. If you say yes, what it does is that it's going to start drawing lines, and then the line's going to jump back and forth. Have you guys ever experienced like whenever you draw like area boundary lines, every time when you start moving walls in and out, that area line keeps jumping back and forth. It gets very annoying, and then your area constantly changing. So don't do that. If you let Revit do automation, it's going to do automation, but it's never going to be very accurate because every time when you do a print or someone made a mistake, it's going to auto calculate. It gets so annoying. Just be aware. Now, once you have it, this is where it's going to keep it right in here. You see that right now it's under here. Now, what I'd like to do is that I like to put that as a source view. Let's say source view. Let's say this is just reference. Now, the mistake that everybody will make is they will rename this. Let's say this is going to be my FSR area. It's going to tell you this, okay? If someone automatically say yes, guess what it's going to do? I'll show you what's going to happen. So next thing what you happen is that your floor plan is going to change, and the ceiling plan, there we go, area plan. And sometimes people don't know it. When you go into your section, it automatically changes as well. Let's say this is okay, it's not going to display here, which is good, but what happened is that your section is also going to have the same thing. And then sometimes people asking, it's like, who added that note, right? It can get very annoying, right? So just keep in mind, you always want to have a source view. This is why I created a source view for all the area plans, just to prevent someone from mucking up that process. So I'll just rename it back. Okay, say yes. Okay, now once you do that and say duplicate, and when you say rename this to, let's say this is going to be FSR area, now you're fine. Okay, you always have to know where your source is supposed to be, duplicate it, and then you can just do whatever you want. Okay, just make sure that this one keeps intact so that you don't get into a problem. That's how I kind of do it in the past, right? Because it's a better view management. Currently, you will see a lot of projects, people just name views, you don't even know what source view, and then you're gonna get headache once you start renaming stuff, and that message box is gonna pop up. Do you want to rename it? If you say yes, that's what happens.
And if you say no, what happens?
Well, if you say no, then it's gonna say, okay, it's gonna keep as the original, right? But at the same time, next time if you want to create a new view, right? Sometimes, you could keep it and say no, and then it'll just go on and do it, and then just proceed. But what I find is that sometimes it gets to a point where managing views is very difficult, because we do run into problems where views get referencing incorrectly inside. Let's say when you link the model views, yeah, that's another story.
So what's the benefit of having that source view then? Because you won't actually use that. You'll be using the one that you've labeled as duplicated and labeled, right?
Yeah. Okay, so for this one, it's more for quality control. Okay, because what happened is that for me, if let's say you have run into problems with any project, for me, the first thing I would look at is that I'll go to each views and see what is going on inside your views, just to make sure that your health checks and everything is going to be proper. For a lot of the users, they don't bother checking all that views. But for like myself, let's say you have a BIM manager in your office and stuff like that, they usually like to look at this just to see the health of the project and make sure that things are not properly set out. So I like to create this. It's more for me, self-checking, because you will run into problems like this one has how many errors? Okay, this one only have 116. Imagine you have 1,000 errors. Okay, I need that view to open it up so that I know exactly what level. Because for your source, let's say for example your sheet view, you only got, let's say for example, I'm just going to go in, not the source view, I'm just going to collapse that. For your source view, you're going to have level 1, level overall, landscape, etc. And sometimes what happens is that you're going to have a typical floor plan where you're going to have multiple levels, where you're going to say level 2 plus tower B L3. So it may not have all the views section for everything. So it's basically going to use a reference from another view. So you're not going to have, let's say for example, when you do a typical tower, your typical floor, you're not going to model the whole thing, let's say from level 4 to level 20. You're only going to do it at level 4. But each of those level, you're gonna have independent views, so that it's for me to check and make sure that there's no error or objects being placed incorrectly in the wrong level. So it's more like QA/QC things. So for the user, they only see like level 4 to 20, but it's actually level 4, but it's not level 4. It's just basically level 4 representing all the typical levels. So that's how we typically do it if you're doing like a tower scenario. And sometimes you're going to have the same thing. You're not going to have display all the levels because it's going to be too much work. So that's how we do it. Like sometimes we're going to have multiple levels, and sometimes we skip one level because we don't care about that level. So we just say level tower A, level 4, and then this one tower B, level 3 to level 2 to 3. So any questions so far with this?
Well, that's just a naming thing then.
It's a naming, yes. Yes, so it's like a representation of that view. So,
Okay.
yeah.
So I think I'm still a little bit confused.
So all of those are just like typical views that you see, but broken out by the typical view, so
Yeah.
they encompass certain.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, because that's how you do it. I know that in sometimes when you start learning Revit and stuff like that, they recommend that you just basically model in the view that you placed in. You can do that, right? But what I find is that you need somebody to kind of go in and do a health check of your project. And one of the biggest challenge I have with a lot of the health check is that I don't have a source view. So what I have to end up doing is that I have to create a structural plan to compensate that. So I have to create a structural plan for that, just to go in and make sure that there is no error message. So you will see structural plan in it. It's basically, it's from my reference, right? If there's any problem with any project, typically BIM manager would just go in and have all the views just analyze what's going on inside the view and make sure the model is correctly modeled or do something. But I usually use source view as kind of like my view for my checkup, health check, basically. But for you guys, yeah, sometimes there's no benefit. But just keep in mind that I usually go in there, check it, and make sure that I know my orientation.
So, for example, right there, you've got level 1, then you've got level 1 CRU, level 1 lobby. So you're saying you create level 1, and then you don't do anything on level 1, you duplicate that view, and then you do what you want in that one and call it CRU.
Yeah.
So effectively, you've got a view in there called level 1 with nothing behind it,
Yes.
which is not referencing anything, it's just an extra view in there.
That's correct. Yeah. Yeah, this one, level 1, you notice that there's a lobby, level ramp high, and the glass line and stuff like that. Those are actually reference to the actual level. The reason why is that I have a lot of constraint in this, right? So that I can actually move the whole, let's say, one level. The rest of the other stuff will stay, because this model, what happens is that the client and the city keeps changing the height. They want to offset certain places. So what happened is that this is it has a gentle slope, but the city has a requirement where they have to say your height cannot be more than 2 feet. So it kind of do the staggering. And what happened is that when it does staggering, whenever the profile changes, you kind of have to lower your building and increase the building up and down. So this is how I kind of like do a lot of like massaging and stuff like that. This gets like really complicated once you understand how Revit works and how to make it flex without breaking the model. So this is like the extreme example, because all of this like level has its own level. But most cases I would never recommend doing this, but this is for my own reference kind of a thing. Now, typically how I would do this, if I were to do level and then you have like a lot of levels that has like a different elevations, what I typically do in this case is that I would start to put in a level with a proper elevation number. So let's say, for example, I would say this is level 1, it's my level 1, and then the next one I would just say level 1 plus, and then I would just add in my elevation number so that you know what elevation you're supposed to be in. Okay, so sometimes you will see that, and I think in one of my other projects, I start doing it. It makes user a little bit easier for them, because if I tell you, okay, what's CRU, what's lobby, what's low, what's ramp, and what's high, they don't understand that nomenclature, right? Unless you're the one who model it and understand that method. But if you're working with multiple people, it's better to put in numbers.
So you're just showing it cut a different height?
Yes,
they
that's
can
right.
make sure that
Yeah, because this project is so very complicated, and then the client keeps moving up and down. So rather than doing it all level one and constantly have to move each individual items, I just lock it to a level, and then I just start moving levels, and everything just flows nicely within the level.
So you've got all of those on individual level. They're not
That's
just a
correct.
drawing that's been rendered.
That's correct. Yes.
and then so they connect back to the first one. So if you bump it up 2
Yes.
feet, all of them go up 2 feet.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. So there's a way to control it. I mean, Revit is very flexible in this sense, but if you know how to control it, you're good to go. All right. Elevation. You guys probably know, like, you can do like a crop elevation. Let's say, for example, you have an elevation, and you want to see this side of an elevation. So let's assume that you want to look at. No, I'll just go in. Okay, let's assume that my elevations is here, but I have a building that's blocking it. Now, I just only want to see this part and this part of the elevation. So what you can do here is that you can have this, what's known as a split segment. You guys probably use this, right? And this is how you do it. For elevations, the same way. Okay. Now, a couple things I'm noticing if you do it this way. Okay. If you start, okay, I'll just turn off some sight and apply the view template. Okay, there we go. Let's assume that I'm just gonna say overall elevation. Now, a couple of things you have to notice if you're doing working drawings and then you have the scenario. If you do a lot of duplicates, let's say for example you're doing this kind of a section. I have to make sure where I am. Section elevation. There we go. If you start doing duplicate with the pendant, okay, I'm just going to do there's a very weird things that happens here. So what happens is that your crop, sometimes, oh, okay, this one crop works, but you will get into a chance where this box won't move. Okay, there's a chance that a couple projects I did is that it does this really, really weird.
What is dependent mean?
Dependent means that this is your master view, this is like your overall, and then what happens is that you do all your annotations and all this stuff in here. Rather than doing like cropping view, and then you do annotation, I would just do like a big, huge view and start annotating the whole thing, and then what you do with the dependent is that you basically do it and then crop in, little pieces. That's how I would do it for strategy if you're doing a lot of like a really large project. So for example, this project, I did the same thing for the unit display for my suite. So for instance, like here, partial, I'm just gonna look at it. There's partial, okay? Within the partial, this is what it looks like for the overall, okay? Let's say this is my overall, has all the units and everything, and within that unit you have this little pieces right here. Okay, so if you're doing a lot of unit plans, I would just say do the big, and then you go in there and just do that little and just crop it in. This is a better way to manage stuff, because what happens is that if you ever see, okay, what's in there versus this one, so that you can know what units is in there, so you don't have to duplicate it on top of the level. So just keep it very organized. That's what dependent view always do. Okay, I know that when you do this dependent view, duplicate with detailing and dependent, duplicate just straight duplicate and just get rid of annotations. Duplicate with details is that it comes with the annotations, make another copy. Dependent is just basically take the big view and then just crop it down.
Okay.
So I would recommend doing that all the time. It saves you tons of time, and you don't have to do it, so that you're only managing like this particular view. You're only managing like a couple views, like 1, 2, 3, and it's basically using the same thing. Okay. Any questions so far with that? Dependent views? No? Okay. I think the last one before we wrap up, we're going to talk about is called the view reference, right? Let's say, for example, you guys probably heard of this view reference. Okay, this one doesn't have anything. So what view reference does, you know, when you have a plan, or let's say you do a section, but you want to cut section and look it down a plan, right? In Revit, there is no way to do that. So the workaround, I'm just going to go into one of my annotations. Let's see, metric via, I think it's the annotation. So what view reference does, I'm just going to go in this elevation section. Yeah. So what view reference does is it's just this little objects here. Okay, you can actually reference it to whatever you want. You can say section, you want to go building section, wall section, it will just reference that. So it's just like dumb annotations, except that it references it back to that particular view. Nicest thing about it is that you can actually go to that view. So if you're doing, like, let's say for example you're doing a detail where you want to do a section, let's say assuming that I'm going to draw a floor, let's say a box. Let's assume that I'm going to draw a box. Okay, let's assume that that is your box. Now, how do you create one that you want to do a section cutting and looking down? There's no way to do that, right? So right now you notice that section only cut vertically, and you can only do it this way. So the way to cheat it is that if you want to cut a section here looking down, then you kind of have to use this method where you go view reference, okay, and then you change it. Let's say it's section, I want to look at south, and you just say please reference it to floor plan and call it whatever you want. Okay, that's how I do it. If you're doing a detail, I think I'll probably show it to you. Yeah, so this is kind of like the how I would approach this. And Revit, unfortunately, when you're doing like interior, let's say when you're doing an elevation on the interior, sometimes your object could be getting very crowded, right? You like this elevation sometimes like it's in the way. So how I do it is that I use this view reference as kind of like my replacement for those, and you can just move those tags around and you're fine. Okay, because I know that Revit, when it comes to a lot of like building elevations or other stuff, it gets really clunky and you're very limited to what you can do. So for this one, I just say, okay, just use a view reference. I'll probably share this. You guys probably have this, but I think online, if you guys want to use it, yeah, you're free to do it. Now, one caveat with this view reference is that it's a reference. When you click on it, it's just an object. But if you want to create, let's say, a view reference, let's say for this one, it could get really daunting. But first thing you have to do is that in order to make that view reference to work, you have to edit type, and you have to know what view reference you're referencing to. So just to get that reference, because it's just an annotation actually. So first you have to go in here. Let's say for example, if you want to create a view reference like elevation tag, you notice that you have to create something here. Let's say duplicate. Let's say duplicate this. Call it elevation 2. So this one, if I add another one where I say, you know, the elevation, I do not want to see the arrow sign, or I want to see fill or different types, then you will see the checkbox right here. But for this particular case, I didn't put anything, so I just leave it as it is. But that's how you do it. Like first you have to create the graphics, then you have to go in there, create the different types of graphics, and then when you do the view reference, you just have to point the right direction, and that's it. It could be a lot to set up, but once you put it into your project, yeah, it works like any annotation. It works really good. But yeah, be prepared. Like if you run into problems where this view, you can't really do much with it.
So label it the same as the section.
That's correct. Yes, yes,
okay.
It will.
As long as you reference it properly?
Exactly.
Okay.
Now, there's also benefit to this as well. Now, if you're doing a lot of linking, let's say, for example, you want to link a floor plan from another project into another, the problem with linking from another view is that your section mark, if you're doing a lot of section cut, it will not reference it in. Okay? Whereas view reference, it will automatically reference in, no problem. Okay? I'll do a demonstration just to display that. because I work on a project where I told the user to do this, right? If you create here, I'll just insert in just Revit reference. I'll go to the Centrum project because that's probably the best example for this particular one. So what happens is that if you're really short on time, I know that in the project in Seattle, what we're doing is that we have two models. One is the terminal model. The other one is like I think it was like the Bay Area model. What happens is that a lot of time user has to create a double section. One is in the main model. The other one is like the other model. So everything's double up work. So if they know the view reference, you can actually cut down the work. So what you do is that when you reference the view, that section mark actually shows up. So you don't have to do a lot of work. So here I'm just going to reference in. Hopefully it's going to be quick. So yeah, that's the benefit of using view reference over the traditional section. So if you do a lot of linking, I think this project, it's sure, sorry.
You'd use this one?
View,
Yes,
yeah, the view reference.
briefly on the project that we wanted a plan cut section line and a allocation.
Okay.
Almost finished meeting. Yeah, I mean it's yeah, hopefully this one, come on, do it. Yeah, the problem with the Wi-Fi is that it really depends on the strength of Wi-Fi. If you're doing wirelessly, yeah, it can be a little bit slow. But for this particular case, I just want to demonstrate. Okay, so let's say, for example, you have this view. You want to reference to, let's say, one of their views. So here I'm just going to go in, demo, detail, level 1. You notice that there's callout 1, callout 2, copy 1, copy 2. I don't know why, but it is what it is. I think it's this one, floor plan. But let's see what's going to reference in. Ah, it's not referencing anything. It's probably the wrong view. I don't know what they call it for the new one. Structural plan. Level 1. Yeah, this is why I don't like it when people say floor plan new. What does it mean? It doesn't mean anything. So, yeah, let's see what other views I could use. Case on level. Yeah, let's do that. Let's see what I'm gonna get out of this. Aha, there we go. You see that there's a view reference. Okay, this is a view reference. Normally, if you would reference in a section from Revit, it would not show up. But for this case, it's a view reference. So you can actually make it show up on your view. So if you want to cut down on your work and not creating section in this, duplicate the work, then I would recommend just use view reference and reference your view, and then away you go. Okay, I hope that kind of illustrates a little bit about this view management kind of a thing. So if you do run into problems, just let me know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, hopefully this is a fun education kind of a thing. Yeah, it could be very complicated, Revit. Yeah, there's so a lot of
Probably good to just ask before you actually.
Before you do.
yeah, because I know Revit is it's a very clunky thing that not everybody understand what's going on sometimes. And majority of the time what tends to happen is that when educator would educate you on this type of tools and then users start using it, the problem is that most of the time when I actually use some of the tools, it's never work, because people will delete stuff, people will do something really, really dumb, and I have to figure out like how to make this thing more streamlined so that they don't run into this problem. Mm-hmm. One of my biggest fears is that people delete views, it's gone, right? Mm-hmm. But you can actually recover sections. So if you run into problems where people accidentally delete a section, you can recover it. All you have to do is go through the backups, copy that section mark, and then paste it back in. And then what happens is that section is remain, and all the notes and everything will appear. When it comes to floor plan, if someone deletes that, there's no way you can recover that. It's very difficult. So I've tried doing it with callouts, nothing works. So floor plan's a little bit tricky. So just be careful. People will delete stuff.
I saw a bunch of views in there called callout, like floor plan callout.
Yes.
So is that what you recommended to do? Is create another floor plan and so
Yeah.
it doesn't? Okay.
Exactly. Because when you create this, like, yeah, you notice that what is callout, right? Because the thing is, when you giving your file to consultant, sometimes they will reference other files. You want to give them like a file that, you know, it's easier for them to actually look at it and say, okay, what files do I need? Right now I'm struggling because like what is what, right? It's like, what is this? Like core, okay, I know that's core, but you know, level 1 new, you know, imagine that level 1 new is not the right one, then it was like, okay, what's the next view to look at? It's very challenging because right now you say new and there's like a level 1 plan. So it becomes a difficult thing, right? It's just the naming convention has to be properly made. So this is why I go back to this. I always put in this, my caveats is that I always like to add in partial, overall. So you know the overall is basically the whole plan. It's going to be used for, you don't have to give it like a scale. I know some people put in scale, like, oh, scale 1/8, scale. Like, scale is kind of useless in my opinion, but just give it like a name, a proper name, overall and partial. Partial is just basically, you know that, you know, you have a big view, but your partial, it's going to be chopped up into pieces. You can call it crop as well if you want to. Like, just give, like, your office needs, like, you know, a proper name so that everybody understand what it means. So here I just put in an acronym, overall, partial. My previous job I did the same thing, and everybody just say, okay, this is good, so that you can separate like overall, partial, and then the rest of the other view, it's just junk views. Okay, so I hope that management becomes very important. Like, you have like presentation, okay, that's another. So I always add like a category to it, like say this is part of presentation, this is part of partial, this is part of something. Then at least you understand what those particular means. It belongs in a sheet, it has an overall, has a partial. So yeah, there we go. Right.
Right.
Thank you for stopping by.
Some of that was over my head, but
Yeah.
some point.